So, Rich, as a podcast host, I think you're like a prize fighter. You are the Tyson of podcast hosts.
So
you are
super high voice, likes to knock people out. Yeah, thanks.
Just more like just big time, big explosive, one-off. Like, you're not the sort of podcast host that's going to trundle in every episode with an average idea. You're going to trundle in, chat to me, bit of light banter, but then occasionally you are just going to fucking knockout blow. That's you. So you're basically don't do much for ages and ages and ages, but then when you come, you just bring everything, and it's a big night in Las Vegas at the MGM Grand, and it's heavyweight championship bout of the year stuff. That's where we are today. You've gone and done hours and hours and hours of research on Jim Ratcliffe, on Ineos, the guys that bought Man United Football Club.
Yeah.
And you're going to tell us this guy, where he's come from, what he's done in business, and why he's such a killer. I am genuinely, we chatted about this just before Christmas, I think just after, where you kind of filled me in on how far you'd got with it. And it was the most excited I've ever been talking to you, which isn't a hugely high bar, but it's true. Yeah. So I'm excited.
Do you think
Jim Ratcliffe?
As soon as you've compared me to a prize fighter at the MGM Grand, and we're talking pay per view, if this rocks up and this gets like 11 views, it's not exactly the pay per view hit that we want, is it? But yeah, no, look, I think when we started talking about doing some features on some founders or features on people that we think are interesting, this fella jumped out like, as football fans, it jumped out as somebody we wanted to have a chat about, right? And he's, as soon as doing a little bit of the Wikipedia scratching of the surface, I knew there was something a bit different about this bloke. So let's just bear in mind, first of all, that he's currently 73. He started his Ineos career at 41. Now, which is encouraging for you at 40 and encouraging for me at nearly 43. So what we're just going to do, we're just going to talk through a little bit of background on him, because he's gone through a unique process in his first 20 years of his career that prepared him to be able to execute Ineos in the way that they've executed it. And I think what he will end up doing. Can we just do a little bit,
Rich, on, anyone that doesn't know who he is, just like tell people what he's done just now or what he's trying to do, just so they've got some context.
So he bought 25% of Man United for, I can't actually remember the number. It's in the billions, isn't it? Do you remember the number of it? It's in the billions. And has got complete football control of the football side of the business. And I believe a vast majority of the operational control, which I think is key. So obviously the Glazers, who are vastly unpopular at United, are slightly sitting in the background, but will be no doubt rubbing their hands together, because anything that Jim Ratcliffe normally touches sees some form of either monetary gain or kind of progress with inside of sport, because it's not his first play in sport. I mean, he sponsors the F1 team and he's bought a couple of other football clubs as well.
And anyone that doesn't know about football, Manchester United have been in the wilderness for about 10 years. They were a huge club through the kind of 90s and the zeros, and then Alex Ferguson left, and they've been absolute dog shit for 10 years. And they've been churning around in circles. And his remit is as a fan and as a business person is to come in and sort it out. Yeah. And you reckon that his business background is going to help him with that?
I do, and it's worth noting him. He went to his first United game when he was 6 with his granddad. It's that kind of fan, because he's up from Lancashire way, big United fan. So I'm sure this is a bit of a wonderful moment for him. So just before you wonder how on earth is this bloke afford United, he is CEO and co-founder of a business called Ineos. They're a chemical company. Amongst other things, conglomerate, I guess. They have a £60 billion turnover with a £7 billion a year profit, which is serious dough. I mean, that's serious wedge. Founded by 3 guys. So Jim Ratcliffe is the CEO. He's the main founder of it. And through various deals in his early career, he met up with a guy called Andy and a guy called John. Those fellows do ops and finance. So you've got the ideas, strategy, mix with ops people and a forensic level, a Blomley level finance guy. I'm sure Ben would love that to be compared to the finance guy of Ineos. So you've got a real sweet mix of people across the top. Interestingly, they own it all. They're private and they own it all. There's no one else. So when you're looking at
those three guys,
yeah, and Jim Ratcliffe owns the majority of it. So when you look at a £7 billion a year profit, you know how much money Jim Ratcliffe's mixing in. So he's got some capital to deploy.
That's a private business.
Private business. Never wanted to go public because he didn't want to lose control. He says he would rather, because he didn't want to have to answer to the market. Wanted to be able to move quickly and do what they wanted to do in the way that they do business. And they do business in a very unique, well, not necessarily unique way, but a very cool way. So, little bit of background on him. I'm going to flash through some of the things that he went through. And the reason this is interesting is because, and you have to stay with me on this, Doug, right? Because this might be a couple of minutes of reading through some things. His background that he went through from age 10 or 11 through to when he founded Ineos is all critical to shaping the kind of capability that he's got. So he came from Lancashire, one of only a couple of kids that did his 11 plus from his school, a little bit like my dad, actually, and ended up going to grammar school before studying chemical engineering at University of Birmingham. Got acceptance letters from some really top universities, but wanted to go to Birmingham. Not saying that Birmingham isn't a top uni, but he had the option to go to some of the really, really top red bricks. Chose chemical because he didn't think he was mechanical enough to do anything around that. So just focused on chemical engineering. Never really had a massive interest in it other than it was something to do, fancied doing it, was interesting. As you can imagine at university, as they still do today, there's grad programs. So all of the big kind of chemical companies come hunting for top people. So Shell, BP, ICI back in the day. Remember them? They had maybe we should do an episode on them. They had a bit of a downturn. And so he got an internship. And he got an internship with BP, which is kind of ironic for what happened later on in the Ineos career. But when he joined the program at 21 after a successful internship, he rocked up on his first day, and he it was up somewhere way up north in some small chemical factory on the northeast coast. They said, "Oh, you got eczema. You got the old eczema, and we work with toxic chemicals. We're not going to train you for 5 years for you need to have a blow up, and you can't possibly work here anymore." So they booted him. They canned him on his first grad program. 21 years old, was going to go and do it. Suddenly thinking, shit, I can't go and be a chemical engineer because I can't go and work on site. So just did not know what on earth he was going to be able to do. So BP canned him. The funny thing was, 32 years after he got canned, he ended up buying BP Petrochemicals, which was the major first deal of Ineos. So it's a bit of like no, sorry, mate, you can't come and work here. Okay, well, 32 years, yeah, so I'm going to buy you. So went through some things like, did the classic stuff like labouring, ended up interviewing with Beecham's. Do you know Beecham's, the cough medicine syrup people? Do you remember that?
I do.
Yeah. So went to go and get a job there, got accepted, found out that about his eczema again, and they worked with penicillin dust, canned again. And he'd driven all the way down to Worthing. Weirdly, from Brighton, I didn't realise that Beecham's were in Worthing. But on the way back up, they recognised that he had an interest in accountancy, which I think he'd just put on his CV to apply for Beecham's. And the chief accountant from Beecham's phoned him up and said, "Look, we want you. Come and be an accountant inside of Beecham's," because the chief accountant there was a chemist that couldn't do chemical engineering because of the similar story as Jim. So I'm sure there's a bit of luck to that, right? So he's been able to go and get a role inside the chemical industry that wasn't actually dealing with the chemicals. So he went down and became an accountant and was fully qualified in 18 months. So the first two things: chemically trained at university, deep understanding of what that career could look like, went for his roles, was blocked by the fact that he had eczema and couldn't actually go and take the roles in the factory. So then qualified to be an accountant inside of that industry. So that was the fundamental start of his kind of capability to be able to do what he needed to do. Once he'd kind of gone through that, he did a brief stint with Esso and ExxonMobil. And I think this is key in his stories because the way that Ineos run their businesses is a very federal structure. So they have a very small head office. They give a lot of autonomy to the business leaders within the units. And ExxonMobil, they basically ran a matrix model. So it's kind of really difficult to see who's got ownership of what, who's got roles and responsibilities. So it started to shape the way that he wanted to really build Ineos out, and how he showed him not to do it. Once he'd gone to that, he moved to a company called Coulthard's, which is where he ran the federated structure. So you're talking about people.
How old are we at this stage, Rich?
We are.
Roughly.
So he did 5 years. So we're late 20s. We're late 20s-ish. So when he moved to Coulthard's after the Esso Exxon experience, he saw a federated structure, that single person at the top who's responsible, and everybody just reports into that. Super efficient, super lean, and it gives that autonomy for everyone to kind of run their business unit. What was really good?
It's Coulthard's.
They're a conglomerate that own a load of different manufacturing businesses, from like Gossard lingerie through to people that make plastics. It's a real mix of a kind of company, and I'll get to that in a sec. So, but just at the end of his time with Exxon, he was selected to do an MBA and grant funded from Exxon to do an MBA. So he did an MBA and studied at LBS. So you're beginning to see that he's obviously an achiever here, smart fucker. So he's leaving. He's getting to the end of that MBA. So he's got an MBA, LBS. He's got his accountancy. He's got his chemical engineering. But he didn't want to stay at Exxon because of the structure. Because it's, your middle management, you've got to grind through all that kind of bureaucratic muck. So he basically went to Coulthard's, because at Coulthard's they had this federated structure where he figured that he might be able to run one of their companies. And that's what he was pushing for, because that was what he felt was the next stage of, his career. The MBA obviously teaches a lot about finance. So you're talking about assets, liabilities, concepts of debt and equity, the kind of basic stuff that not basic stuff, but the stuff that you really need to operate a business, risk and return. And that shaped a lot of how Ineos do things as well. So chemical understanding, accountancy, MBA, exposure to management that he doesn't necessarily like, and wanted to go and try something. So he paid out his loan, got out of Exxon because it was a grant. And then joined Coulthard's, and that is, I've got notes here saying Gossard underwear and cigarette filters to anti-fouling paint for yachts. Like really kind of like classic conglomerate. Buy something out, can we do it? And he wanted to run a company of his own. They had hundreds of them, so I think he was able to find something they wanted to do. And rather sexily, he was put into a business called Non-Woven Fabrics. It's nice, isn't it?
What is that?
I guess so. Non-woven fibers. So I couldn't tell you exactly what that business does. Maybe we should have a second episode on what
football shirts or something, won't it? It'll be like that kind of shitty, plasticky. Yeah.
But the interesting thing about this one of these businesses within inside of this conglomerate, 40 million a year in revenue. So that was what he was stepping into, and he rose up to run that in a few years. So he was, basically the CEO or MD because of that federated structure of this business within inside a conglomerate. Got to deal with customers, got to understand suppliers, hands-on CEO training. So you're hitting like mid-30s now, early mid-30s, and you've got all of these different journeys that are taking place. Some of it by luck for people he's met, and some of it by great judgment. And he openly talks about how lucky he's been. So the last role pre-Ineos, or InSpec, before it turned into Ineos, he got a phone call from a PE-backed VC or PE-backed capital house, American, called Advent International, who needed someone to run their chemical and materials portfolio in London and worldwide. And you can see why he was identified. And he was identified from a person that he'd met earlier in his career, who ended up actually advising this company. So again, another stroke of luck, a surface area of luck of people that he'd met that were able to suggest him moving forward. So it's Boston-based, American, and they had 20 million quid that they wanted to be able to deploy into new chemical businesses. And they thought that Jim would be ideal to invest that. So identify the opportunities, see which ones they should be going to, deploy the capital. And basically did that for 5 years. And that gave him the ability to understand assets, value assets, find opportunities within inside of different markets inside of the chemical industry, how to do deals, and ultimately how to be quite cutthroat. What do we need to do? Because PE land, right? PE land is obviously about, in a very simplistic sense, buying something up, either breaking it up and creating value from it, or stripping things out and making it more lean and more efficient and generating better margins. Yeah, so he's 5 years he spent there doing all of those deals and, really understanding that. So looking at the journey that he's gone through, chemical, accountancy, MBA, understanding the management structures, how things work, getting into running a £40 million business, understanding how to be a CEO, looking at the operations, really leading people. And then from that point, he's going into PE and he's evaluating companies, seeing opportunities, seeing what he can buy, seeing how he could change it. How does he make good private equity deals at Advent? And that was that. And that is kind of to the point where he got to with the start of Ineos. And the last piece in the kind of journey to starting Ineos is there was a chap called John Holywood who was a chemist, who was an exited entrepreneur. Did really well, sold his business for 8 million, went into retirement. Bearing in mind this is late 90s, mid 90s, early 90s even. So 8 million quid, decent amount of money, especially back then. He wanted to get back into investing and had some money to be able to deploy. Got in contact with Jim, both chemists, both background like that, and they basically identified a business that they could potentially go into. But this time he wanted to step out of Advent and go and acquire this business and run it as CEO. That business ended up being called Inspec, and they actually bought it from BP. It's called BP Fine Chemicals, and they manufactured plastics, among other things. The first business Inspec that they called Inspec, but it was BP Fine Chemicals. That's what they purchased. They valued it at 37 million. So you can imagine all of his PE experience, his MBA experience, looking at the assets and liabilities and the risk and all the rest. They valued it at 37, and they thought it was undervalued, and they recognised that they could create greater value from that business. What did
they pay for it?
37 million.
They paid 37.
They paid 37. That's what they thought they could get it for. The interesting thing, and what's been fundamental to all of Ineos' strategies, is they're buying things that people don't want. It's unwanted assets or assets that they think that they can turn into profitable ones. That's ultimately what they want to do by turning those loss-making assets, which I don't know if BP Fine Chemicals was, but it was definitely unwanted. It was seen as a bit of a nuisance for BP at the time, so they knew they'd be able to get it. But they also want to increase margins in those businesses that are already profitable. So they zeroed in on it and they wanted to take it. So alongside Advent, a couple of other investors, this guy called John Holywood, they bought it. They were able to raise the money. So Advent put in some. Jim actually, to give you an idea of what he does, this guy backs himself so much he remortgaged his house to make sure that he had skin in the game. So his first Ineos deal, first pre-Ineos deal was Inspec. He was put in as CEO. He showed that he could raise capital, and he's raising debt here, right? So he's raising debt as opposed to equity, because that's the way that he does business. He raised capital from 10 or 15 people to go and buy Inspec for 37 million. And to give you an idea of the measure of what happened then, they floated it 18 months later for 164 million. So talking about identifying assets, working with inside of that new business and gaining efficiencies, whatever they need to do, or activating certain things. And they floated for 164, which he made 28 million from.
He's gone to a boot sale, hasn't he? And the rich guy up the street selling all the shit from his spare room that he just wants out of his house, and he's found an exercise bike that the guy just wants rid of, that he knows worth 200 quid. The guy's just like, 40 quid, just fucking get rid of it. And he's like, look, that you don't need it, but that's going to work for me. I'll take that for 40 quid, jazz it up, paint it a bit, and I'll flog it for 200.
In a very simplistic sense. Yeah, a very simplistic sense. I mean, before I'll get to Ineos's, because there's a certain methodology of how they do things and how they structure stuff, and I think we should touch on that. But just to kind of close into how he got into the Ineos, they bought a couple of other things to support alongside. Obviously, they had made a lot of money out of that first deal. And they ended up buying a chemical facility in Antwerp. This thing's the size of London. It's fucking huge.
So Ineos doesn't exist yet.
Not
yet. With this other few investors.
Inspec.
They bought Inspec.
Yeah, Inspec. So they founded Inspec. Okay. And then they bought this facility called in Antwerp, size of London, like monster. And it was part of the group of companies that Inspec had. And by a variety of different circumstances, economic events that took place, there was pressure to sell that plant. So within Inspec, everyone was like, "We've got to get rid of this thing. This thing's the size of London. It's a drain. It's going to be a real anchor." So Jim did a management buyout. So again, think about the balls of it and thinks about the confidence and what he thinks he can do, because his analysis was that he could turn Antwerp into a highly profitable facility because the amount of barrels it was producing. The numbers are probably wrong.
What was that facility, Rich? What did it do?
It was a refinery.
Okay.
Yeah, so there was I think it was like 100,000 barrels or something, and he thought he could get it up to like 400,000, or there was something to do with efficiency with inside of that. It's kind of doesn't really matter. The point is that he recognised that Inspec hadn't maximised opportunity with it, and it was an undervalued asset. So he did a management buyout and bought it for 84 mil. And went on his own. During that deal, that is when he met his founders, John and Andy. And that's when they founded Ineos. So that was the first business that they took on. All debt finance. 90% of it came from a high yield bond. That's ballsy. That is like strong.
He's 41 at this stage.
He's 41, yeah. And he's gone into Ineos, set up Ineos. Obviously, they've got to then go and make profits from that Antwerp factory to be able to pay back the loans, to be able to purchase it, and then go to acquire other businesses. And then they just went. They're making an acquisition a year, to kind of do it. And they did everything. I mean, the massive one they did was for 9 billion, which is the one where they bought petrochemicals from BP, got Grangemouth up in Scotland and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, 41 years old, went through that journey. You can see the journey of what he's gone through. As an entrepreneur, to put him uniquely in a position of, I understand how to value assets, I understand how to run businesses, I understand myopic control of finances, and he's got great people around him, and I just think they're a fantastic company. I mean, reading the books that I've read, it was genuinely page turn. The guy's great. He really is great. I love the way that he approaches stuff, and the confidence and the belief and the analysis of what they do in their businesses and how they believe they can get that back is pretty inspiring. And I'm an investor.
So what do they do? What's their playbook?
So the playbook is to go in and, they want two things. So they want to turn those loss-making acquisitions into profitable ones. They want to increase margins in those businesses that already make money. So they look for businesses that are a little bit either undervalued or not wanted. So they take orphaned businesses, orphan businesses or businesses that, they're unwanted. They've got a fine focus on the financials and they do super rigorous accounting. So they get into the numbers. That's where it all starts for them. They just smash into those numbers and then they start to build up a picture of whether they think they can turn this thing around or make better margin out of it. And that was.
And what are the types of businesses they're buying? It's all within
the chemical industry. Yeah. All within the chemical industry, because that's what he knows. And what a unique set of skills, being able to deeply understand the chemical industry, which is highly technical, but also having the entrepreneurial business skills coupled with that. I mean, to bring it back to, what this will mean for United, because I think that's what started our conversation a month or so ago. They are going to come in, I think. They're going to look at opportunities to maximize revenue, to be able to improve the organization. So I think they'll lean it out. They don't like that matrix management structure. They like things to be super, super lean. There'll be someone in charge of United who has got autonomy. That is for sure. They'll kill a lot of voices around the organization, and they'll make sure that person is held accountable. They'll be ridiculously close on finances. They will just hammer that. And when you think in the world of football, how money is spent, United as a brand generates unreal revenue. But you bet your bottom dollar they're going to make better margin with these guys in charge. And then that's going to allow them to improve their squad. That's going to allow them to improve their commercial opportunities. And I just think
because the great thing
probably going. Go on, sorry.
The great thing about the interesting thing about the football industry, for anyone that doesn't know, they have this thing called financial fair play, which essentially means you can only spend the money that you generate. And the great thing about United, because it is such a revenue generating monster, it's actually got a lot of cash coming in. Whereas like smaller clubs that don't generate revenue, even if they've got the richest owner in the world, like they've got some Middle Eastern owner, they can't just spend all that money. They can only spend what they generate. So I think they've already got a ton of revenue, but making more revenue is more important in football than in other industries, just because you can only spend what you make. There is no shortcut to that. You can't just go and get debt, or you can't just get a rich founder. So I think you're right. I think he's going to focus on that.
Yeah, and it's about margin as well, right? They make things lean. They're not the type of leaders that go in and just cut unnecessarily. I mean, there's a couple of great quotes from the books, and I've got them saved here. One in particular speaks to mind, and you can tell how he would go in and analyze the management team. So I'm not a fan of consultants, particularly strategic and market consultants. If your management needs outside help to figure out strategy, you have the wrong management team. So you can just see, who's this coming in? Cut. See you later. That's not going to happen. They're going to be putting in people that like to be entrepreneurial, that want to take those decisions and want to lead it out, and will be rewarded for that. It says we like creativity, we like unpretentious and supportive leaders. That lack of pretension, by the way, these guys are all Northern, and they have a culture of, they say humor, but I guess they're very strong, straightforward people, and I think that will fit quite well. I think it is unsettling in a corporate world, but I think could fit quite well in a football world, because it is kind of a little bit blue collar in some regards. We appreciate grit, character, and going the extra mile, pulling out the stops when needed, and we don't eviscerate managers for making a mistake. So I think the culture that they're going to install in United is going to be really, really interesting, and I think they're going to turn into a lean business and a lean fighting machine when it comes to the financial side of it. I really do. It's going to be interesting, Doug.
And what about the footballing side? So they're going to sort the business out, no doubt. But winning in the Premier League, probably the most competitive sports league in the world. Definitely in the top 5. Football is not business. There's a different thing there. What do you think they're going to do on that side? How are they going to make that work? Because a lot of good businessmen fuck things up in football.
Yeah, I don't think. Bear in mind, I don't know the bloke, but I don't think that they're going to meddle. I don't think they're going to get involved too deeply. I think they'll put the best people that they think they can put in place, and I think they'll let people go and get on with it. Because everything about the way that they run their businesses is that there is a single point of contact at head office, and that CEO of that organisation has got autonomy to be able to do the decisions. And what Ineos are very good at is making sure that that person's the right person to be in place. So I think they are going to hire really well. I think they're going to make sure that that person is supported via the financial side and the business side to be able to go and execute their job to the highest regard. But I also think there's going to be a tremendous amount of expectation for operating in the correct way, representing, showing up in the right way. Because I think they like, to the point of grit, determination. We don't eviscerate someone for someone that's tried, someone that's actually had a go at doing something. They don't tear apart. So I think they'll leave the football side to the football people, is my personal opinion. And I think they'll put in business people and leave them to go and do the business side of it. But there'll be business people that they know and they trust that follow the Ineos way. But I'd be surprised if they don't significantly improve. Just finally on their kind of aggressive growth mindset, they have a goal of doubling EBITDA every 5 years in every company that they take on. Every 5 years, doubling it. They will have looked at United and gone, oof, this is interesting. There's a passion there for him, obviously. He wants to, he's bought football teams before. He's got Sky cycling, he's in cycling. He's a massive adventurist, he's climbed Everest. He goes on cycling holidays of 200 miles, he's that type of bloke. But the United thing is a passion thing, but I do not think he'll ever lose sight of the way that he's built his career over the last 30 years. I think United are going to be a far better institution and operation than they ever have been.
And you've read, as you said, his books are page turn, and you've looked at some of the things that he's done in business. What's a story that stands out, that you came across in those books that you feel exemplifies Ineos and their approach?
I mean, there's just so many. It's like so consistent in the way that they approach what they do. I think the biggest thing that really struck me was when they bought the petrochemicals for 9 billion. 9 billion is a step above your 84 million, your 300 million, everything else like that. They had to.
That's BP.
That's BP Petrochemicals, off BP. They bought it, and this is a huge thing. There was operations all over Europe and everything. That was all done through debt. A variety of different. They had 232 banks backing that, to give you an idea. Can you imagine managing those stakeholders? But they took it because they believed that they could turn this around. They could believe they could pay that debt down. That could be a valuable asset. They bought it 8 months before the financial crisis. You're fucked. You're fucked. You saw what happened in that period with oil prices and everything else. So the banks started to get concerned that they won't be able to service their debt levels, because they got concerned about it. So cutting it really, really, really short, the banks basically said, well, we want more interest because you're more risky. Ineos never failed to make a profit. They never failed to post a profit during that whole period of 2008 through to 2011 when it was really rocky. But the banks screwed them. Well, they didn't screw them. The banks got nervous, and Ineos had to, as a three, had to go and manage all of these key players to keep the business alive. Because if they'd have recalled those loans, they would have had it. Ineos would be dead. And they managed to navigate through it. And we're talking like months and months of navigating through with 200 and odd banks and all the rest of it. There was a group of Americans that wanted to kill it and come in and do that. But it's pure grit, pure intelligence, drive and self-belief to keep them going. And they ended up getting through it and paying an additional 800 million in interest to the lenders to be able to do it. They did them for like an additional 10%. But they did it, and they got through it, and they paid it off because they backed themselves that their operating model was so good, and they'd recognised that this was an undervalued asset that they could really turn profit from. And here they are, 15 years later, and they're doing 6 or 7 billion in profit. I like I say, when I was reading it over Christmas, I was like, genuinely think this business is fantastic. And what they've done and how they've backed themselves and the way that they analyse everything and go into it with really deep detail to take those risks.
Do you know what I think we should do? I think this is a good, high level intro because you've been so deep in this. I would love personally to just get into, a little bit more one of the businesses, because I know the book goes into, it's a little bit more blow by blow, isn't it? It would be quite cool just to get into one of the businesses. This is the opportunity. This is how they did it. This is why they did it. This is the numbers behind it. Has it got that level of detail? Can we do that?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, it goes into what they recognise within within each company and why they thought it was good. It goes into the challenges that they had with the people in there, the culture of what they tried to do. I mean, the Grangemouth thing could be fascinating. There's a huge thing about fighting with the unions there because of what the unions basically controlled that facility. They controlled it. And no matter what they were doing, they were losing hundreds of millions on it. And if they couldn't get through that deal and couldn't change that, it would have gone under. And they had standoffs. So it's a fascinating story. And it's ended up being a profitable facility.
That's Scotland.
So Scotland, yeah. And what he did, I mean, honestly, what they did to go and get Grangemouth the energy they needed, he ended up building ships to bring shale gas from the US to be able to power it cost effectively. He designed a ship. I mean, fuck. I was just like reading it, I'm going, this is a guy that sees a problem, or this is a team that sees a problem, and just outside of it goes, what can we do here? What can we do here? What can we do
is
here?
that the one where that ship is now a business itself?
It is, yeah. Other people use it, yeah. And it's a specially designed hull to be able to carry shale gas safely. I mean, there's just like I said, there's so much interesting stuff within inside of their story. And it's, just got loads of respect for him.
I think next episode I want to get into Grangemouth, and then
Okay,
I think
I'll go
let's
back
deep
and
dive into
reread.
it.
Yeah, I'll reread. Yeah,
Get back into that fucking thing. Nice one, Rich. I love that. Do you want to do the outro?
Jordan Sancho's definitely fucked. I think. I think he's going to be sold on. He's going back to Dortmund for sure. I think the outro should be, I can't wait to see what their approach and their business strategy and the way that they work with people does to the biggest football club in the world. A football club that has been middling since Sir Alex Ferguson left, and I can't wait to see if business can have a direct approach to improving the fortunes of a sporting institution rather than just pure capital. That's what I'm interested in.
And let's see. And I don't think that this is the last pod on Ineos. Thanks, Rich.
All right. Cheers, Doug.